Looking for love guidance or tips on how to date someone? Maybe you're single and playing the dating game, or in a long-term relationship. There's something to be learned about how to recognize love. Tune in to True Love Knots by Maria Romano as she deep dives into everything about love, dating advice, wedding tips, entrepreneurship, and so much more. No matter your relationship status, Maria Romano has something to teach you about love, romance, staying together, breaking up, and everything in between.
Hey everybody, how you doing? Maria Romano here, True Love Knots. So I have a really interesting topic today. My topic is going to be, especially to those of you out there, my officiant friends, my minister friends. Have you ever stopped or declined performing a wedding ceremony for a couple? Have you ever declined performing a wedding ceremony for a couple on their day that they're supposed to get married? Or have you stopped a ceremony? Now, I know this is something that does not happen often. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Maria Romano, and I live in Las Vegas, Nevada. And for over 13 years, you know what I've been doing? Officiating wedding ceremonies. I have been blessed to perform close to 5,000 wedding ceremonies. That means I've met 10,000 people. And they come from all over the world in all walks of life and all ages. And guess what? They fall in love. And also, I talk about how to find love again, 50 plus, 60, 70, 80. I was sort of kind of thrown into that when my husband passed away, my late husband, 10 years ago. And I got back in the dating world, and it was not easy. So I do talk about that. I wrote a book, as well as I also created a digital course on how to officiate wedding ceremonies. And I speak about love in the workplace because you know what? We need to bring more love. As far as I'm concerned, we need to bring more love everywhere. But let's talk about performing wedding ceremonies today. And I know there's a community of you out there that maybe you have a story or two I'm hoping that you'll get to share with me. And, you know, I have to tell you that I've only had a ceremony once in my life where a groom fainted before I finished, so I couldn't pronounce them. And the next day, they had to come back and I pronounced them. And that's the only thing I have had happen to me up to this point. Now, I had another minister friend also tell me where she was getting ready to perform a ceremony. The bride actually walked down, the groom was waiting, and the bride came up and said, I can't do this. So she and the groom, they excused themselves. They had all the guests there. And what the officiant did is she said, why don't we just perform a commitment ceremony? It's not a legal ceremony, no paperwork involved. We put the paperwork aside and you go through and decide if you decide to get married later on, you still have the paperwork. So that kind of put everybody at ease, and things like that can happen. Then a few weeks ago when I was at the chapel, I was walking in to perform a ceremony and the other couple was still there. The previous ceremony was running late. And I'll never forget, the head minister walked out and he said to me, I should have never performed that ceremony. And I said, why? He said, they were all over the place and a little bit drunk, or maybe they were high. He said, not that they didn't want to be there. He said, but I didn't feel comfortable. And I thought that was interesting. So last week, I had this happen to me for the first time where I actually did not perform a ceremony. I stopped the actual ceremony. And I know you're thinking, what is going on? Well, you need to remember, living in the wedding capital of the world, we also are in the adult Disneyland of the world. So we have what? We have a lot of excess alcohol, excess cannabis, whatever it is. And that happens as well. But this was not the case for me. This was different. And this is why I want to share this with you. So I had a couple walk in. They had about 3 young children under the age of 2, and then 3 or 4 kids that were probably teenagers, maybe close to 20. So all the kids coming in, and then the couples comes in, and the bride is holding a baby. And I introduced myself. I said, oh, by the way, I need your marriage license. So the groom looks at the bride and says, where's the marriage license? She goes, I forgot it. I left it on the visor in the RV. Well, he was not happy, needless to say, and he did not compose himself or regulate his emotions. He just exploded. He just said, "How can you forget that? That was the only thing I wanted you to do." He said, "And now I don't even want to get married. We don't have the marriage license." And I just looked at him and stared at him. I looked at her, and she said to her husband-to-be, "Honey, I was so busy taking care of the kids, I forgot." And you can tell because she wasn't even properly dressed. We were having a little bit of wardrobe malfunctions. So we actually ushered them into the area that we will speak to the couple privately. The wedding coordinator spoke to them first, and we gave them some options. We can perform the ceremony as a commitment ceremony. Then when somebody comes back with the marriage license, I can then pronounce them legally. Well, he was upset. He just kept walking outside with his phone. He had his mother come in. He sent his mother back to wherever their RV was to go and actually get all the documentation. Then he comes back in and he sits down and he chats with me. And he says, "This is not the way I want to get married." He said, "Because my parents, they drove all the way here from Colorado too to watch us get married." And he looks at his bride and says, "And this is because of you for getting the marriage license. I'm really upset." And I just sat there. I said, "Don't you think maybe we should just postpone it?" I said, "We can move you to a later slot." He said, "Well, I might get charged a rescheduling fee." I said, "Well, you know what? Maybe it's worth it because you'll have your parents here and we can just do one ceremony." He said, "This is not the way I want to get married. I don't want to get married twice. I don't even know if I want to get married." So I walked out and the coordinator came in. At that point in time, when you just know that you're not going to reason with somebody, it's just like when an airplane takes off to its destination and there's a point of no return. You can't go back. You might as well just go forward because you're at that midway point. That's how I felt. I felt that this gentleman, his ears, he was not opening his ears. He was just so angry that his wife-to-be forgot the marriage license. And I want to tell you something. This happens all the time where people forget marriage licenses. We just work around it. We perform a commitment ceremony, and then we pronounce them when they bring the paperwork back. It's simple. It happens. You forget. Sometimes we have what I call wedding brain. It's almost like pregnancy brain. So the coordinator convinces them that they can get married, and now as a commitment ceremony. And then when the mother comes back with the paperwork, we would repronounce them. And that way, then they would get married at 11:30. We didn't have to move the ceremony to 12:30 because he didn't want to pay a rescheduling fee. So again, all the kids are sitting down in the chapel. That's all they had there because the parents were gone to get the paperwork. And he's on the outside with his bride. They're going to walk in together. And here he starts. "I didn't want to get married this way. I effing did not want to get married this way. My parents aren't here." I looked at the photographer. I said, "I'm not doing this." And I waved my hand to the videographer. I said, "Cut," so that they can cut the video. I walked out. I said, "I am not performing this ceremony." And he looked at me. He said, "Are you mad at me?" I said, "No, I'm not performing this ceremony because I don't feel comfortable marrying you with the way you feel right now. Right now, you have a lot of different emotions. And this should be one of the happiest days of your life. And you should not be feeling the way you're feeling and getting married, whether it's a commitment ceremony or not, under these circumstances. This is not fair to you and your bride and me because I don't feel comfortable. So I'm telling you, let's move the ceremony to 12:30. That way your parents will be back. They'll be able to enjoy the ceremony. It will be a full-blown legal ceremony and not a commitment ceremony." And he looked at me and he said, "Okay." So we moved the ceremony to 12:30. When we actually got to chat right before I performed the wedding ceremony, I got to at least speak to them. I felt like he was a little bit more calm. And I found out that they met fishing. They met fishing like 10 years ago. And they have, between the both of them, they have 10 kids. They've had a few together and they have 10 kids between previous relationships. And I looked at him. He said, "You were mad at me." He said, and I looked at him He said, but then I realized that I really was overwhelmed with emotions. And this is a day that is one of the happiest days of my life. And I'm glad my parents are here. And I'm glad you talked me into postponing this by an hour. And I said, you know what? I said, I'm glad too, because I wouldn't have felt comfortable. I said, I want couples that when they leave, they are on what I call the best high in the world, right? The best dopamine high. I mean, it is the most important day, one of the most important days of your life. And this getting married is so important. And it should be a day where there's lots of love and lots of joy, and that you enjoy what you hear in the ceremony. That's what's important. And if you're flooded with all this doubt, all this anger, this doesn't serve anyone. I says, oh, by the way, I asked them to waive your rescheduling fee. So, you know, what happens, there are times when you are an officiant where you need to make the call. And it's not always making the call and saying, I can't marry you because maybe you've been a little inebriated. Maybe you've smoked a little too much cannabis. You know, maybe there's a medical episode, or there's an episode where emotions are high, they need to be kept under control, and they're not in the best frame of mind. And doesn't happen often, but as an officiant, you have an obligation to perform a ceremony to a couple that they come to you of sound mind and body. And I want to say mind, because mind is very important. We always think about what physically the outside influences, the outside items that we can take. You know, we drink too much, right? We smoke too much, whatever it is, we take pills. But really, the mind is so important too. And if you're not in the right frame of mind, and as an officiant, you sense that, you need to question that. Because this is something that is a legal document that binds a couple. And the only way you unwind that is they have to then go through the court of law. And why go through that? So as an officiant, as a minister, take the time, be present, be aware, make sure that the couple is definitely they're in love. And most couples do come to you, I'm sure, on their wedding day, they're in love. And I've had weddings where I know I've performed ceremonies where the groom has found the bride, from overseas, and they come to this country and they are under the impression that their lives are going to be better. And I hope they are better for them, but they're still there of sound mind and body. And that's what's important. And then, of course, yes, people do have a cocktail or two sometimes before their wedding ceremony. But as long as they're able to be present and enjoy the moment, because you have an obligation to perform a ceremony that is legendary, memorable, elegant, and something they're going to stay in their minds for a lifetime. And you have a responsibility to the couple, but to yourself too. So if you have any stories that you'd like to share, I'd love to hear them. And remember that I do have my fast track officiants course where you can learn how to officiate wedding ceremonies under 37 minutes for, guess what? $37. Or if you're looking for a speaker for a corporate event, also check out my website. So in the meantime, as I always say, and one more thing, if you like this podcast or any of the others, write a review. We want to hear from you. We want to hear how you feel, if this was helpful to you, and also if there's other topics that you would like me to discuss, or guests that you think I should reach out to and to have them on the show. So in the meantime, continue to stay healthy, happy, and safe. And as I always say, continue to spread love. Have a great day.